Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Foundation. First season is done, 10 episodes, a lot of money put into it based upon books that are by and large not really adaptable to the screen, but they've gone and tried to do it anyway. What did it amount to? That's my objective today, is to kind of look back on these first 10 episodes and sort of make some broad assessments. Is this series something that one should continue to watch going into a second season because it has been renewed? And if you haven't seen the show, is it worth your time? So I'm just going to give my overall impressions first, completely non-spoilery, and then I'll get into specifics later on. So if you haven't seen the show and don't want to be spoiled about anything, I will be talking about stuff including right to the end of the first season where there were some big revelations. So on balance, let's look at this series from 2 points. One is the production values. It looks beautiful. It looks gorgeous. It does not look like a Star Wars universe or a Star Trek universe. It looks like a new vision. Having said that, these days with the technology as it is, you can pretty much put any television series or film on the screen and it's going to look great. All you just do is throw a little money at it. So it's kind of faint praise to be basing a show on how it looks. In the end, it's got to have story, it's got to have quality acting, it's got to have great writing, and the structure needs to work so that you're actually invested from episode to episode. So really, the final verdict is going to come down to how well the show does in those areas. And my overall assessment is that yes, we had quality acting. I loved Jared Harris as Harry Seldon. Wish we could have seen more of him actually. Lee Pace and Terrence Mann as the Cleons, Day and Dusk, were excellent in their roles, and there were a few others who did notable performances. The writing was interesting at times. The creation of this Cleonic dynasty was very intriguing, but ultimately the big problem with this series as I saw it was the structure. It was all over the place trying to juggle four concurrent storylines over the course of 10 episodes, and it had no particular rhythm from episode to episode in terms of how it was going to lay out its stories. It was very much like, for those of you who saw Game of Thrones, it was like the early seasons of Game of Thrones, where maybe we're over here in this part of Westeros, and then we're up here in the northern part of Westeros, and then we're over in Essos across the sea, and things are moving very, very slowly. And that's fine for Game of Thrones because that was set in a medieval time. This is not. This is set at a time where jump engines could allow you to cross vast amounts of space very quickly, and technology, we're talking 10,000 years into the future. So really, for a story to move this slowly doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But because the narrative structure was so disjointed, you really didn't know where you were going to get from episode to episode. I thought that was very frustrating, and I think most new viewers, particularly those who have no knowledge of the source material, may actually really find this series to be very frustrating. I will tell you for myself, I'm uncertain about whether I want to come back to season 2. For the time being, I've canceled my Apple TV subscription because there's nothing else on there I'm terribly interested in right now. The series is going to come back at some point. I might be interested in at least seeing how they start the second season. But on balance, this really is kind of a 3 out of 5. I would say if we're going on stars, 3 out of 5 for the season. There were some very high moments that I'll talk about later on, but a lot of low moments as well. And pacing-wise, this series could be very, very monotonous, which was shocking for a far future galactic empire epic saga. So those are my kind of overall views of the series. For those of you who want to stick around with spoilers, I am going to get into a few specific items now. Traditionally, science fiction gave us series that were either standalone episodes or they were linear parts of a larger timeline, and we could follow them very succinctly from episode to episode. This series clearly is not trying to do that. Uh, this series employs massive time jumps, which it was going to have to do to adapt these books, but also a really terrible use of flashback sequences that just drone on and on and on to give us unnecessary backstory. And I think going forward, I would have to say that this series really needs to improve in that way in season two to make the narrative a bit more linear and coherent from episode to episode so that we have a sense of forward momentum. That was something we really did not have in this season, and I'm going to bring up a couple of examples. Starting with the Cleons, the Cleonic dynasty, which is a great idea of dawn and day and dusk. It's a great idea. You have actors who really command those positions quite well, but the story was monotonous because for most of the season, the two most important parts of that equation, day and dawn, were not characters that really produced any kind of empathy. In fact, they were very distant and very cold. The only time over the course of the series that I really felt like there was anything you could empathize with them was Cleon the 14th, who was Dawn, and his struggle to hide his frailties, the realizing that he was not this perfect clone, and knowing that they would kill him immediately if they discovered this, was a very compelling story because here was someone who was suffering something internally and really felt very human. That I really appreciated. I thought that was a great storyline, but it was very disjointed in the way that it was presented. The other big storyline of the season was the Anacreon plan, the Huntress's plan to uh, steal the Invictus, this giant planet killing ship that could jump from system to system very easily, and that was sort of a ship of legend. And so she comes up with this elaborate plan to ultimately take that ship, jump to Trantor, and then destroy Trantor and basically end the Empire um, as revenge for what was done to her people and the Thespins early on in the series. This storyline took about 6 episodes to play itself out, and realistically, this could have been a two-parter. If it had just focused on that storyline alone, you could have done this in 2 episodes, maybe 3, but it would have been clear, it would have been focused, there would have been some excitement involved. But because it was so disjointed and we did not know for literally several episodes into this arc what exactly was going on with the Anacreons and the Huntress, it just created a sense of monotony. The stories of Salvor Hardin and Gail Dornick also were, I think, a bit problematic. Gail in the books, as those of you who have read the books know, was a featured player in about the first couple of stories and then was gone the rest of the way. Uh, the writers have chosen to take a different path for her, basically using a cryotube to advance her first 35 years and then later another 138 years in a plot line that really seems kind of far-fetched at best, that she's going to return to Synax as she does at the end of the season, knowing this planet's going to be totally flooded, that no one's going to be left there. It's a plot line that simply makes no sense. The decision makes no sense whatsoever. And then, of course, miraculously, she comes to the very place where her, as it turns out, biological daughter, Salvor, is waiting in a cryotube underneath the water. And of course, then they have their, we won't call it a reunion because Gail had never met her before. And ultimately, what we have here is an effort by the producers to say, okay, we're going to need some characters that are going to stitch this story together from season to season. Here's a way that we can keep these characters alive. We can use cryotubes, and we can come up with all kinds of machinations to now connect these two and have them have some kind of importance down the line. And this, I think, is a little problematic for the story. I understand why the writers are doing it. They're trying to Um, have the audience be able to focus and maintain focus on certain characters so the story has an element of continuity about it. If you think about season two, what are we going to have? We'll probably have the Cleons back, although the dynasty is collapsing, so how long they're going to be around, we don't know. And then we're going to have Salvor and Gale. Harry will pop out of that vault once or twice, but otherwise he's done. So we're not going to have a lot of continuity. In the last episode of the season, Salvor has a wonderful thing going with Hugo, her lover. Whether she loves him or not, it's hard to say. I think probably just a lover. And she leaves him and her birth mother and heads off on this journey to find Gale, who is somewhere in the galaxy. She doesn't know where. Heads off to find her somewhere in the galaxy, leaves it all behind, which means that neither Hugo nor the mother are going to be back next year because we've jumped 138 years into the future. So we're going to have a new crew, a totally new cast of people on Terminus. So clearly the writers are saying, all right, well, that's all right. We're gonna have Salvor and Gale as our glue. I'm not sure how well this is going to work. I'm not sure how compelling these characters are at holding this massive saga together, because it does feel like the weight of it's going to fall upon them. That they're almost going to be like immortal. They're going to be these kind of watchers through history. You may recall in the very beginning of the first episode, we heard Gale's narrative over screen where she references the mule, talking about these events that are going to happen. She talks about the mule like it's in past tense. The mule is a character, a very important character, who comes in the second Foundation book, and then, in Foundation at Earth, and then Second Foundation. So a very important character in the coming hundreds of years, which means, certainly implies, that Gale is going to be there to see that. So we're going to get this kind of watcher, immortal type character, and sort of a Methuselah, if you will. I'm not sure how well that's going to work. I do want to note, as I finish up this review, that I am a sucker for science fiction series. If a new science fiction series comes on, I've got to see it. I've got to check it out. And 9 out of 10 times, I'm giving the series the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to keep on going, even if I fell asleep halfway through an episode. I'm just that way about science fiction. And I so want this series to succeed. So I'm hoping that we will see some kind of real improvement in the narrative structure next season, and also bringing these characters to us in a more engaging way. Except for Cleon the 14th, who I talked about, who went through his struggle, which turned out to be a product of manipulation by a rebel group. I thought that was a very intriguing story. Except for him, it really felt like these characters were just very distant. They were very distant, and ultimately their fates were not terribly important. So it's going to be fascinating to see. I would love to know what you think. Feel free to put your comments down below, and we can talk about your thoughts about Foundation Season 1 and where you might like to see it go for Season 2. Bye-bye.